All right, sick. So trying a new format today.
Love new formats.
Yeah, off the old regular podcast format, and this one will go straight to YouTube. So we're going to have a little read of this article I came across today on the old Hacker News from Alessio Finelli, partner at Decibel Ventures, about Llama 2 not being open source and why they frankly do not give a damn. We've had a quick skim of this for full transparency, but going to read through and have a little chat and tell us if you like the format.
Did you say this is going live to YouTube?
This is not going live to YouTube.
Oh, I thought you were live recording. I got a little scared there, but let's get into it.
I should have, in retrospect. But anyway, all right, let's kick in. So, published on the 20th, so pretty fresh, this one. All right. Almost a decade ago, I started an open source company, and I've been involved in the open source software community as a founder, contributor, speaker, and investor. The internet wouldn't be what it is today if it wasn't for the amazing open source projects that power most of the digital infrastructure of our world. So it's a topic that's always been close to my heart. I mean, first paragraph off the bat, saying a bunch of truths that are maybe obvious, but yeah, 100%. Like, how much of the web is powered by open source? And
no, actually, how much? Like, I have no idea. Sounds like a lot.
Like, yeah, almost all of it. I mean, you think of even just like WordPress that powers like half the web, open source. Apache, Nginx, all of these sort of, web servers, web server technology, all of this stuff.
And in terms of like the vibrancy of the long tail of the internet, and it's got to power like 80% of the long tail, right? Like the individual recipe sites and cafe sites and everything like that.
Yeah, 100%. And like, look, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of crap in amongst it all. There's a new JavaScript framework every other week, and like, it's wild. But I mean, I'll tell you what. Right now, I'd much prefer this than Microsoft and Google each have one incompatible web framework that you can pick from, and if you don't pick, then you got to mail out a physical newsletter to your mates. All right, with Llama 2. So Llama 2, for those not familiar, that's the new Meta large language model. Also, like, props to Meta. And, like, big 180 on just, like, being the king of OpenAI now. Don't you reckon?
Yeah. Just have you seen their share price as well? Like, no. I know this, it doesn't measure it. They were at $90 6 months ago. They're now $330. So, yeah. And everyone was like, "Facebook's dead. Meta's dead." I think we should even put our hands up and say, like, they're not in a good spot. They're not, like, we ranked them well after Microsoft and Google in terms of what they were doing. But yeah,
Underdogs,
good on you,
man.
Mikey.
Yeah, good on you, Zucky. Mate,
And,
Threads.
Have you been using it much?
I've been like trolling Threads a bit. I haven't written anything yet. But
should we just be high output AI focused on Threads? Maybe we should.
Maybe, I don't know. You'll find our thread links in the show notes if we remember to put them in there. So give us a follow, and we promise we'll write something. All right. So when Llama 2 came out, many of the folks I respect in the community were upset about misusing the term open source when referring to the model. And we got a cheeky little tweet of Jan LeCun saying, "This is huge. Llama 2 is open source." So he clearly doesn't seem upset. So I don't know if that's a cheeky dig saying I don't respect Jan LeCun, but I imagine not.
Yeah, for those playing along at home, Jan LeCun is a very, very distinguished figure and thought leader, dare I say, in this space. I know you love that word, Elliot.
Nah, look, he's a champ. He's been doing this longer than many of us have been alive. He's one of those veterans of probably several AI winters, and a bit of a legend. Like, I've never had a chance to work with him. I'd love to at some point, but anyone that I know that has had any interaction with him seems to rate him really highly. So it's awesome. And the tweet, it's huge. Llama V2 is open source with a license that authorizes commercial use, and it is. You can download it right now. You can use it commercially, and there's one caveat, which our mate gets into here. While it's mostly open, There are caveats such as you can't use the model commercially if you have more than 700 million monthly active users as of the release date, and you can't use the model output to train other large language models. Man, there's like
basically Twitter, right?
Yeah,
it's Twitter. You can't use it.
there's like 8 companies in the world that this stops. It's ridiculous, and those companies are not looking to download Facebook's open model. I get it though. Like I get it. And, one of the things that I think this could prevent is like just pure hosted versions of this behind an API.
Yeah.
Something like Hugging Face or whatever else. I actually wonder how that would work on a platform like Hugging Face. Like, there's probably, well, actually, I don't know if Hugging Face has 700 million active users, but
that's a lot of users.
Yeah, I mean, let's assume it did. I wonder how Facebook would react to somebody, an individual, hosting it on Hugging Face, given that that individual probably doesn't have 700,000 or 700 million followers or whatever the Hugging Face equivalent is.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
I think the second point is probably more interesting. You can't use the model output to train other large language models. What do you reckon about that?
Yeah, like, I think what they're trying to, I feel like they're trying to take their cake and eat a little bit on this open source. That's the point there that I do think that it's least open source, where they're like, they just want to get it in the hands of developers. What this just says to me is we want as many individuals and small companies to use this as possible. Yeah. And really, like, what I think it should have said is, like, we don't want Twitter, OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft, and Snowflake, and 5 other companies to use this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. This would be so hard to prove. To prove that you used one model to train another model, unless they've done something very sophisticated. Like, look, I know that's not the point of licenses. You're still not meant to... It's not about getting caught. It's about not doing it. But I just don't know how you would ever possibly work out that my large language model is trained on this other large language model.
I think this is a broader question about the space as well. Of like a big, how are you going to prove that your data was or wasn't included in data set, and what are people going to accidentally be opened up to in terms of breach of license agreement, for example, and like how many orders of separation do you need if there's an open source model that OpenAI builds upon and then uses something, but that was actually secretly trained on LLAMA2, like.
Yeah, 100%.
Is that considered?
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing here is, we don't have the wording of the license in this blog post, but can't be used to train other large language models. I feel like a lot of the work that people are doing with large language models is distillation, fine-tuning, turning them into smaller models. And like, where's the threshold of it still being a large language model? If I modify this so it fits on a consumer-grade GPU...
Yeah.
Does that violate the license?
Yeah, is Palm 2 Gecko considered?
Yeah. Yeah.
And as well, it's like, what is trained? Is it like, well, I just fine-tuned it. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's an interesting one. We'll see how it plays out.
So, yeah, I read these restrictions as please don't use this Twitter, Google, Microsoft.
Yeah, basically don't use this to compete with any of Meta's products. Otherwise, go for gold.
Yeah.
All right. While I agree that Llama 2 can't be called open source in the traditional meaning of the word, I also think it doesn't matter. The term open source needs to evolve once again in the world of AI models. Probably true. I mean, look, anytime I read an article about how actually being commercial is really good, written by an investor, you've got to think there may be some conflicts of interest here in that, like, oh, yeah, definitely right now it doesn't matter if it's all commercial. Also, our IRR is doing really well, so please don't open source this.
Yeah. Disclosure, we are invested in Meta. I just treat this as there is a scale of openness in the open source definition. And I don't think the definition needs to change. I think that it just fits somewhere along the scale. And to the average day punter, we can call this open source. But if you are, what's the author's name again?
Alessio.
If you're Alessio who founded a company and community in the open space, you can probably say it's not open source compared to some things. So.
100%. 100%. So, from free to open, I wrote a long history of the free software and open source movement here, so I won't bore you with the details again. Sorry, listeners, if you haven't read this. I certainly haven't.
Nope.
What you need to know is that since 1976, open letter to hobbyists. Man, that is recent. There's always been tension between the commercial interests of software companies and the curiosity of hackers who wanted to circumvent its restriction. The free software movement started in the 70s at the MIT AI lab with Richard Stallman, and eventually the GNU, the new project, in 1983. The GPL, which is General Public License, copyleft license was created, and projects like Red Hat, MySQL, Git, and Ubuntu adopted it. Man, Red Hat is the shittest example to use here. They have just landed in a ton of flack for basically cooking up open source and basically doing a full 180 and being like, actually, we might not care about this anymore.
Awkward.
Yeah, but I mean, look, MySQL, Git, Ubuntu, 100%. You know, how many web servers are powered by Ubuntu? Probably tons. And Debian, its close cousin. Yeah. So, I mean, I am surprised a little bit that it's that recent. It's kind of wild to think that, you know, it's only been, I mean, that's a while now, isn't it?
50 years, yeah.
We're old, but only 50 years is... Yeah, not that long. To think that we have such a thriving open source community across the world after 50 years is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and there's the Lindy effect that people coined. Who was it? Nassim Taleb coined. It's like the longer something around, the longer it's going to be around. So
yeah, 100%.
Open source has been around for 50 years. Probably going to be around for another 50.
Yeah. I mean, talks about GPL. Yeah, I think there's a good point to mention that there's a ton of open source licenses, and some are permissive, some are more restrictive. Some people argue that if there's a dollar figure or non-commercial restrictions, it's not open source. It's a contentious topic. There's no one description, and that's fine. I think, you know, what I think we need to get to at the end of this is like, what do these, you know, these hackers, these smaller developers, what do the people actually want out of this? And does this license meet those needs, as opposed to arguing semantics? So, term open source came to be in 1998. Man, thanks to MIT's Christine Peterson at the Freeware Summit. The term free software was officially deprecated in favor of open source software. As time went on, the free and open source software communities diverged, and they had different ideas about what free and open meant. Free software, as specified by the Free Software Foundation, is only a subset of open source software and uses very permissive licenses like GPL and Apache. And this is what I was saying. It's, you know, you can be open source without being free in the traditional sense of the definitions. Open source means the source is out there. You can see how it works. You can dig into it. You can hack around with it. In the last decade, there was another bifurcation. Love that word. This time created by the tension between commercial open source companies and the cloud hyperscalers. Elastic and MongoDB transitioned their open source projects to the server-side public license, which allows developers to use the product commercially as long as what they're doing isn't offering a hosted version of the product. The goal was to block AWS from rehosting their products as cloud services and profiting from them. The server-side public license also infringes on the open source software ideals and is not recognized by the OSI, Open Software Initiative, maybe, as an open source license. Yet, the majority of developers still say that MongoDB is open source. More and more, the term open source is losing its freedom connotations and turning almost synonymous with source available in developers' minds.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's interesting to learn that history, I'll say, is that like true hardcore open source is, as you said, removes the commercial attachment in any way, whereas now we're moving more and more towards a definition of open source means the source is available.
Yeah, 100%. But I think it's more than that. Like, I think if MongoDB's license was, yeah, you can read the source, but you have to pay us $99 a month to use this product no matter what, it'd be a different thing. Like, I think restricting AWS from hosting your software
Yeah.
still feels free to most developers because most developers aren't building a competitor to AWS.
Yeah. What was the if we can remember back to our episode on open source, what was the definition that you gave for open source when you had to think about it? Just to put you on the spot here.
Yeah, so from memory, it was weights available, code available, training data available.
Yep.
Was full open source. Which I think is what most devs want. Like, I don't know, training data is one thing. Like, I think most people aren't going to retrain these models. They don't have the budget to retrain these models.
No.
But they probably want to be able to interrogate when required that, the data sets are legit or there wasn't data leakage or whatever. I think it's more about verification in many cases than it is about actually having 88 terabytes of pictures of dogs.
Yeah. Excuse me, Llama, may I please download the entire
please download all Wikipedia onto my thumb drive. Cheers. All right.
Return address on back.
Source to weights. With the rise of open models like Dolly, MPT, Llama, etc., we're seeing a similar bifurcation, word of the day, in the community. For most AI engineers, open source today means downloadable weights, nothing more. I would disagree with that. I think if you can just download and run the model as is, that's probably not open source for a lot of AI devs. Like, maybe for product people who want to use the AI, but for actual AI engineers, you want to be able to fine-tune. You want to be able to mess around. You want to be able to specialize the application to what you're building. Otherwise, you're just fucking rehosting GPT with a fancy command prompt.
I remember you said on that you had a big element of like hackiness. How much could you hack with it? And if you just got the weights, nope.
Yeah, like you can do some stuff, like the weights kind of give you a definition for the model. You can probably fine tune, but you can reverse engineer a Microsoft Word binary and work out how that works, but doesn't make it open source.
Have you ever seen anywhere where you're running into this problem where it's not only access to source, but also access to data, which access to data is actually stopping people from being able to truly play with something from an open source point of view? Have you ever been well, it is available, but it's so obnoxiously hard to deal with this one factor that it essentially is an open source? Not
really beyond AI. There's some stuff that if you open source the firmware for a rocket, it wouldn't help me much. I have a low budget for rockets.
Open source nuclear reactors. So
exactly.
Pretty hard to do.
But no, not particularly. I mean, I think the closest one that immediately popped into my mind is emulators, like Game Boy emulators.
Yeah.
So technically, the legality around those is they are legal. There's nothing illegal about emulating hardware, but it is illegal to distribute ROMs because it's copyrighted material, and you can build an emulator all you want, but at the end of the day, you don't build a Game Boy emulator just to say you did it. You want to go to romstore.com.tq or whatever weird country is allowing you to host it and download your Pokemon Red Edition or whatever. But Heather Mika has proposed a definition for open weights, which I think is a good term, makes it more clear, but there's still no community consensus. The question is whether or not open weights are enough for a model to be called open source. A software analogy would be a project releasing its binaries without the source code to rebuild it from scratch. Yeah, 100% what we were just saying. You can also have 100% free software that's not open source. To give an example, I'm pretty sure Obsidian, that Markdown editor that we were using for a while, it's free. You can download it, but it's not open source. I don't think. If it is, sorry, Obsidian developers. Anyway, for a model to be truly open source and retrainable from scratch, the creators would need to share all their training code, pre-training dataset, fine-tuning preferences, RLHF examples, etc. Yeah, 100%. and how much of the work that we did when training the prostate cancer models was cleaning up data, pre-processing data, preparing data for the model.
Yeah,
like huge amount. I would say like 2/3 of the work were in that.
I could literally go. I always still found it funny when we were talking to investors that data set size was the metric that they love to know, understand, and it was like, well, no, it's like I can literally go and download a data set with more data points right now if you want me to. Like, if you want me to bump up my data set size, we can go and do that right now.
Yeah.
But that's not the point.
Yeah, and it never has been the point. You're absolutely right. Like, it was such a cliche question back in the day. Like, literally to the point where I applied for, in the very, very early days, I applied for some competition thing, some startup competition thing, and we had this opportunity to like practice a pitch beforehand, and like we had a nice data set, but it was small, but it was clean. And they said, "Oh, this data set's not big enough." And I was like, "Well, yeah, but it's good data." And they're like, "What would it take for you to get 1 million images into your data set?" And I said, "Well, I could do it right now, but I'm telling you, it probably won't make a difference, but I could do it." And they're like, "Do it. You'll look a lot better on stage if you say you have 1 million images, regardless of whether they're useful."
I remember we used to have in our pitch deck like largest prostate cancer data set or something, which was like technically true. It was true.
Yeah.
But it was like, yeah, I just remember how like that was the feedback we got was like everyone was like, "We love that fact. Keep that in the deck."
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I mean, the silly thing is, even in that case, we could have made it 10 times bigger. We were pretty strict on not putting bullshit in there.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You keep going.
All right. So the problem is the cost of these training runs. Even if someone was to release everything, it's cost prohibitive to train models from scratch for most developers and companies. So having access to the final weights is preferred anyway.
Oh, I just thought of something amazing here, right?
Yeah.
So one of the benefits of open source is that everyone donates a small amount of time theoretically. Obviously, there's some power users within the open source community, and they develop, and that kind of spreads the load across many different people, making the cost per person pretty low. And that means these open source projects can compete with private companies that can pay people. Do you think, now we're running into AI, right, where not only do you need human power, you need silicon power to be able to train these things. Are we going to see like almost distributed GPU clusters donated by the community?
Yeah, I wonder. Hey, I mean, there's been projects around this sort of stuff for a while, like that folding at home, that protein folding thing before AlphaFold was out, and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the SETI one.
Yeah.
They got some uptake, but I'll tell you what, as shit as this is to say, got more uptake is crypto mining.
Yeah.
I've never seen more people distribute GPUs, and I think that's because they were getting paid to do it. So I wonder how you could incentivize, and I'm not saying we attach crypto to this by any means.
Quickly,
my
we're
opinion.
we're going to be flagged as a crypto podcast. Stop it.
Yeah, no. But, yeah, I think you'd need to incentivize the community somehow. And, like, there's very few people that will do it altruistically, and GPUs are too expensive to...
Yeah. Are there companies out there doing, like, virtual data centers or virtual clusters? Like...
Yeah, there's a couple. There's a few services where you can, like, put your GPU on the spot market, and people can just, like, send jobs to your GPU for a bit, and you get paid to do it.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool stuff. Like, I don't know if it's efficient, but it's cool.
There's got to be some weird arbitrages out there because of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Like such a weird niche.
Yeah.
Like kind of black box market.
Yeah.
Whoa. Do you think we'll ever see like a GPU commodity price? Like, you know how we have like a commodity power price? It'll be like
flops.
Yeah, it'll be like, whoop. Better switch on the old LLM at home because compute's pretty cheap at the moment.
Man, we've talked about this so many times, this whole idea of like, yeah, like sovereign compute or whatever else. Like, I don't know. I think if
it's happening,
it's hard to know.
It's also happening. Like all this chip act is like, okay, no, we need to protect our ability to produce.
Yeah, exactly.
Produce compute capacity.
For sure. All right, we got a little picture here, a little diagram, comparing open source software to AI. So we got restricted open source software is the same as restricted weights. Open source is the same as open weights. Free software is the same as an open model. Yeah, I think this is going to be one of those things where, like, looks good because it's in a diagram, but, like, you could probably make up 50 different versions of this and make it look good.
I also feel like there's a few steps between the open weights and open model, there's a few different steps between it. Like,
yeah, I also think I don't know. Let's read the definitions anyway. In the LLM space, the term open source is used interchangeably to define a wide range of openness levels. LLM space kind of annoys me, but anyway. Open models like Red Pajama and MPT 7 billion, they have the weights available for commercial use under Apache 2.0, but can also be retrained from scratch since the dataset is open source. You can find a guide on how to train your own Red Pajama model here. Lovely. Open weights. Stable LM is an open model trained by Stability. While the weights are available and are licensed under Apache 2, the dataset isn't public from the README. Stable LM base alpha, these names are stupid, is pre-trained on an experimental dataset built atop the pile and is 3 times bigger. Anyway, it's bigger at approximately 1.5 trillion tokens. There we go. Restricted weights. This is LLAMA2. All right, well, he said it. That's it now. Pre-training dataset is also unavailable. And while the weights are supposed to be open for commercial use, they have specific limitations that we mentioned above. I'm sure the line of 700 million monthly active users is just round the block waiting to yell at Zaki.
Yep.
Contaminated weights. Models like Dolly 1.0 and Llama 1 are part of this category. The weights are released openly. I was under the impression that Llama 1 wasn't openly. It was research only, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was research only. You had to apply for it.
Yeah, I mean it leaked via torrents, but pretty sure it was research only. Anyway.
Yeah.
But the dataset used to train them doesn't allow for commercial use, making it technically open but practically unusable. I mean, this comes back to what we were saying at the beginning. How would you ever prove this? Especially if you're not using Llama 1 directly out of the box, but fine-tuning it. I think it'd be so hard to show that that was the case. Like, how can you say that this is contaminated?
Mm-hmm.
Or verify that it's contaminated?
Yeah. I also think as well as, like, what if the data set is just, like, unmanageable for someone to even if you release it, like, at what point is it, like, you know, as you said, like, giving someone open source nuclear reactor firmware, like, the firmware for nuclear reactors? Like,
yeah.
What point is it just like, well, it's open, but it's just, like, impractical? It's so large that it's impractical that the current open source model of distributed work on it is not going to be able to get the job done.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it feels like the kind of thing you do when you have absolute power. You just give this false transparency. All right, last paragraph. For the foreseeable future, open source and open weights will be used interchangeably, and I think that's okay. I don't even think that's true, but it's fine. The important thing is that more and more of this work is done as openly as possible. Strong agree. It's okay to be disappointed with... Who is disappointed with the Llama license? I don't think Elon is sitting there like, sorry, Elon. But Meta just packaged $2 million worth of flops into a GitHub repo, and I think that will be a net positive for progress in this space. That is a fucking strong sentence to finish on. Meta just packaged $2 million worth of flops into a GitHub repo.
Yeah.
What a cool way to think about it. Like, Yeah.
Yep,
Embedded
I agree.
value.
I agree.
Love it.
And like, yeah, sure. At the end of the day, maybe my issue, my question on like, oh, maybe it's unmanageable for people to deal with. Blah 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 blah. I think it's going to be great for the research space as well. Like,
100%.
yeah. Anyway,
even just for benchmarks. If this model is there and you can run it on a new data set next to your model, you've now got an openly verifiable benchmark. You don't have to just read the paper and hope that they use the same benchmarking data set as you.
Wow, that's really. I actually didn't think about this from a strategic thing for Meta to do this. Is that like when you make this stuff open, you make it becomes more benchmarkable, more verifiable, and so things are more likely where that is an important aspect.
Yeah,
is going to be like, for example, we've just been talking about the medical space for the moment recently, right? Like,
yeah,
are you going to go build your medical language model on top of GPT-4? Probably not, because you cannot answer half of the regulatory questions that come from come from the regulatory process. Llama, you actually probably have a decent shot of being able to do that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So, Alessio, love it. Thank you for writing this article. The link will be in the show notes down below if you want to read this yourself. You can follow Alessio on Twitter, apparently, is where that link goes. Hope you like this new format. It's Tom and Elliot signing off. Let us know if you loved it, and we'll do a few more. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.